So I've tried to make this video multiple times. I tried posting it in my stories on Instagram, and I tried going live on Instagram because I just can't seem to make it concise enough for a short video. And it just feels like no matter what I do, this is just not going to be a short conversation. I have had a lot on my mind lately about how I am perceived and how I'm afraid of perception. And I saw a video talking about how a lot of autistic people are afraid of being perceived, not necessarily because they're afraid, but just because it's extremely uncomfortable. And that got me thinking about why we are like that. And I know that it's not just autistic people, but I have had this, I guess, thought, or feeling my entire life that I will never be understood. I will always be misunderstood, and not just because there are just people who, for some reason or another, are unable to understand me, but also because there are a lot of people, at least previously in my life, who were committed to misunderstanding me. And it just felt like if I can be this aware, and if I can be this caring about how to understand other people, why can't people do that for me? And I've always been really obsessed with personality tests and things like that, I guess astrology to an extent, things like human design and Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs personality thing, like just everything. Every personality test that I could find, I was having my entire family take these tests. And I was like studying psychology all throughout my teen years by myself, not in school. Just because I really, it's always been an obsession of mine to figure out how people's brains work and how people's hearts work and why people are the way that they are. And it just kind of always made me realize, though, the more that I did that I'm doing this for other people, but no one's going to do this for me. No one's going to understand me. And that really made me upset because it was like, no matter how I'm perceived, I'm inevitably perceived wrong. And I spent a lot of my life trying to make people perceive me the right way or figure out how to be perceived the right way. And a lot of that came down to me being too much, me being told that I was too much. Anytime that I was emotional, it was like, you're too emotional. But anytime that I took emotion out of it and I was just logic, then it was like, you're too logical. Like, you need to be a little bit more caring right now. And I didn't know how to be both. And it was like, no matter what I am, I'm going to be perceived wrong. Like, I don't know how to make this work. When I was 17, I got married and I left the house that I was living in with my siblings. And right away, I got pregnant and I miscarried. And then I had my son Chase, and then I miscarried again. And then I had my daughter, Luna, who died the day that she was born. And all throughout that 5-year period, my brother had run away from home and come to live with me. My sister had run away from home and came to live with me. I moved from Illinois to Tennessee with my family, my husband and my kid and my sister, and then moved from Tennessee to Texas last year. And through all of this stuff, there was always family drama and all this kind of stuff that I was always sought out as the person that you go to for advice. And I've been told that my whole life, that I just give really good advice. I was parentified as a child, towards my siblings, but also towards my guardian figures, because they were always coming to me for advice. But then when I would give them advice that they didn't like, it was like, well, all of a sudden now everything's my fault again because you're too blank, fill in the blank, you're too whatever. I spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller, trying to make myself more compact, to fit into these boxes, to be less of all of these things, because if I am logical and I'm emotional and I'm this and that and this and that, surely there's some way to be less of those things so that I can fit into this box, because everyone else is, right? Like, everyone else is somehow fitting into this box, but not everyone is just emotional or just logical. So there's got to be a way to be all of that, right? I couldn't figure it out. And so I just spent my whole life trying to figure out how to be perceived correctly, how to make myself smaller so that I could be perceived correctly. But then it was like, if I were to be perceived like that, it wouldn't really be me. And I would be perceived as what I was, which was a masked person. I just didn't understand that at that point. I would say this whole time I was reconsidering a lot of my spiritual beliefs and my religious beliefs and what I was raised to believe, what I was raised to think about emotions and all kinds of things. And I never fully aligned with any of this stuff that I was told. But what other choice did I have? And anytime that I would question it, it was like, we don't question these things, right? Because only a person who didn't have strong faith would question like that. So I didn't want to be that person because I wanted to have strong faith. But it never made sense to me. All of these contradictions came flooding my mind, and it was like, none of this makes sense to me. So I questioned a lot of these things my entire life, my entire childhood, but very secretively, and I never talked about it with anyone else. And I remember that my husband was the first person that I could ever talk to about a lot of these things, and we actually shared very similar beliefs, but it was like, you can't talk about it, right? And so he was the first person that I felt like truly understood me, and that kind of gave me hope that maybe it's not all me. And then fast forward to 2.5 years ago when my daughter passed away, the day that she was born, that completely changed me. And there's no way that I could ever be the person that I was before that. And I wouldn't want to be. But unless you've gone through something that intense or drastic, or, you've lost someone really close to you, or you've lost a child, then you really can't even comprehend. You can't even begin to comprehend what kind of effect that has on you. And I was told either passive aggressively or just, flat out, like as soon as I think 4 months after she was born, that it's been this long, why aren't you past it yet, or whatever, which to me, I was like, I personally felt like I'm not showing emotion over this. Like I was boiling with rage, and I still hadn't had the autopsy results. And so I was like, I had so much rage over not knowing what happened and what was wrong. And I was grieving, and I was in pain, and I was physically in pain, and I was trying to hold my marriage together, and I was trying to take care of a toddler, and I had all of these things happening inside of me. And it was just like, when I had my miscarriages, same thing. When we went through any kind of big transition, same thing. But it was always within me, and I never really shared any of it. And even when my daughter passed away, I couldn't even really share it with my husband because we were grieving so differently. So when people would say things to me like that I was being too emotional, or that it was like, okay, when are you going to be done? That kind of thing. And sometimes it wasn't, so blunt and flat out, right? But it still came across that way. Anytime that I was told those kind of things, it would just confuse me more about how I'm perceived, because it felt like I was holding it all in, and that I wasn't actually being emotional at all, because it was all just boiling inside of me, ready to explode, but I was holding it back because it was like, this is just too much. I'd already lost a lot of friends. I'd lost a lot of family members, and my list of people that I saw as safe people dwindled very quickly. And I was like, if this amount of my expression over this very real situation, if this is too much, I will never be good enough. I will never, ever, ever be perceived correctly, or like at least perceived for who I am, or who I view myself as. And that completely shifted everything for me when it came to my relationships. But it's still, when it came to how I perceived myself, the parameters for how my self-awareness and how I perceived myself were still very much how other people perceived me. Like, please tell me what you think of me, not because I'm vain, but just because I need to understand how I'm viewed. And it was just not something that people got, right? So it left me feeling really alone, and I couldn't be vulnerable about some really important, big things that happened to me or were happening in my life, or, anything. And so now, 2.5 years later, I feel like I'm finally getting to this point where it's not that I don't care what other people think, because I really do care what other people think, and I care about other people deeply. It's now that I'm realizing that I want to be perceived correctly, and that means that I have to be myself, because otherwise they might be perceiving me correctly, but I'm not being me. So it's still incorrect, But then whose fault is it? That's mine. And so it's taken me a really long time to understand this. And I was telling my sister and my husband last week that I'm really afraid of being perceived, because I'm afraid of being perceived wrong, but I really crave being perceived as who I truly am. And who I truly am to myself, how I'm perceiving myself now, is that I am incredibly, incredibly emotional, and I feel things really intensely and deeply and to my core. And I'm also a very rational and logical person, and I can see, I can separate head from heart, but I don't diminish either one. It's sometimes hard to express this to people, and it took me a really long time to figure out also that I'm autistic and that I have ADHD. I knew that I had a lot of other things happening, but it never really crossed my mind until I figured out that my son was, and then I was like, actually, we have a crazy amount of similarities. So then that led me to discovering that I was autistic, and then that just led me down the rabbit hole of autistic people being perceived a certain way and perceiving themselves a certain way, and something called masking, which I knew from a psychology perspective, just within trauma, but it was not something that I considered for myself personally for being autistic. And that completely shifted my perspective of myself, of how I've viewed myself really my entire life. And I would look back at all of the things that I'd been through as a child or as a young adult, or, well, I'm still a young adult, but, all throughout my life leading up to this point, I would go back and think about all these different situations, like, this is actually what happened. What I perceived before, that's not even right. So even my perception of myself is constantly changing. So why can I expect other people's to just be like, spot on or whatever? But that's all beside the point. Learning about autism and how autistic people process, I guess, and think and feel. There's a really big misconception that autistic people have a lack of empathy or are not emotional, or like they're very logical, they're very intellectual, but they're really cut off from their emotions. Or, I've also seen some perspectives that are the opposite, that all they do is they're basically just big crying babies and, infantilizing autism and saying that they just can't think for themselves. And I find both of those to be very untrue, not just for myself, but for every other autistic person that I know. And it also is like, seeing that all of these autistic people have the same exact experience of being told that they're too much, being told that they are portraying themselves differently than how they say they are, being called argumentative or something when they're just trying to get to the truth. And if they have any, like, there's this thing that, like, autistic people have a hyperactive sense of justice or something like that. And I don't see that. I just, like, there's just some people that just don't think about justice at all. And when those of us who feel things really deeply actually point it out, then it's like, oh, you're too much. You're too, but are we? I've spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller, to fit into these boxes. And I don't want to do that anymore. I'm like finally to the point where I don't want a mask anymore. I don't want to make myself smaller anymore. I really don't care even though I don't want to care about being perceived as too emotional or too logical or intellectual, or I don't want to care about being told that I have a hyperactive sense of justice. Like, wouldn't that be better than having none at all? Also, I believe that it's needed. I believe that these people are needed who have these strong senses of justice and strong emotions in general, because emotion is energy in motion, and that's what gets shit done, you know? Thinking super recently within the last couple of months about how I am trying to grow and like what I'm trying to grow into or who I'm trying to grow into. And it feels less about trying to make something up and more of trying to embrace what has always been. And I know this to be true when it comes to witchy things, you know, being a witch and using plant medicine and focusing a lot on trauma healing and emotional healing and spiritual healing and mental health and things like that, because that's who I always was as a child. I just always got in trouble for it, you know. Making potions was like something I got spanked for, and I was always told that my intuitive gifts were really demonic or that I was possessed or something like that. But it's something that's always been there. And so it's less about trying to come up with this new idea of myself and more about just learning how to take the mask off, because this is just who I've always been, and not caring about how I'm perceived and just caring about being. And that's something that I think all people, whether they're autistic or not, this is something that we all really struggle with in today's society, because just being is not encouraged. In a general sense, I guess, it's really not encouraged. It's not supported. You have to be doing something. And a lot of this doing is projecting, you have to be projecting something. And there's always, especially on social media, there's always going to be all of these rules of like, you're not going to be enough until you hit this mark, especially when it comes to motherhood, when it comes to if you are a really emotional person, then you need to tone that back. And if you are a really logical person, then you need to learn how to care about people more. And if you're like, this is really strong in motherhood, like there's so much, just overwhelmingly, like if you're not doing this as a mother, you're doing motherhood wrong. You're not a good mom. There's all of these constant perspectives about like, you have to be better. You can't just be, you have to do better. You have to do this, you have to do that. And I think especially with where we are in society when it comes to we're like women, I'm all for women. And in a lot of ways, I'm a feminist, but I also see how it can be really damaging to women, because one day we're going to look back and realize like, we are expecting way too much of women. You know, you have to be a good mom, but you also have to make money, and you also have to have a good job, and you also have to like build this career and be an entrepreneur and do all of these things. And it's like, you have to do it by yourself too. You know, you can't have a village, because that's just not the way that the world works right now. So the more that I'm trying to figure out who it is that I want to be, the more that it's making me realize that I am that person already. I just need to actually be and stop doing. I need to stop trying to make myself smaller and just sit in what I am right now. I need to stop trying to convince other people that I'm not too much, you know, and a lot of that is like my abandonment issues because of my dad leaving when I was a kid and all kinds of stuff, right? Like abandonment issues and feeling like I have to make that person stay. I have to convince that person that I am worthy of love. I'm done doing that now. I am not going to try to make people stay, because you know what? I might be too much. I'm just learning to accept that. I might be too much for you. I might be too much of something for you. That doesn't mean that I'm too much of that thing for myself or for the people who truly love me, who their lives are made better, which is something that like the fact that I can now acknowledge that there are parts of myself that used to be viewed too much, that now it's like, this might be someone's favorite part of who I am, or this part of me actually makes someone's life better. That's a point that I never thought that I would reach, that I am at now. And the more yeah, so basically the more that I am trying to, envision your higher self, right? Of like who I want to be. It's like, wow, that's already who I am. I just need to stop pretending that I'm something else, because that's really what's happening. That's me wearing the mask and me putting that facade over myself, really, because at the end of the day, I'm responsible for being myself. With my whole perception of myself changing due to learning about autism and ADHD, and also, processing a lot of trauma from my childhood, processing a lot of sexual abuse that happened to me, and abandonment issues, daddy issues, mommy issues, all of the above, right? Sibling issues, all of it. The more that I work through all of this stuff, and the more that I learn about things like neurodivergency, and the more that I educate myself on the topics that used to interest me when I was a kid, like psychic abilities and witchcraft and things like that, that I was told were, you don't even go there because it's so wicked. The more that I'm truly educating myself about these things and seeing that that's not the case, that all of this has been perceived wrong, is giving me so much more confidence to embrace those parts of myself, and embrace that that's an interest to me, and embrace that this is how I view things, this is how I express myself, etc., etc. Like, this is just giving, it's like, it's a permission slip. Knowing that I'm autistic has literally been like a permission slip. Like, here, you do have permission to be yourself, and this is who you've always been. And it's not just autism, it's a lot of things, but also grief. Grief is a huge, huge, huge shift in my life, because there is no escaping it. And although a lot of people say like that you can move past it, or people who think you should move past it, who are telling you like, why haven't you worked through it yet? It's been however long, or it's been 2.5 years. Why is that what you're always talking about, or whatever? Regardless of what all of these people are saying, it's not something that you can ever move past. It's something that you grow with. Like, I saw this analogy that grief is like a ball inside of a jar. And it's not that the ball is getting smaller, it's that you're replacing the jars. You're putting it in bigger jars. Because that's just the way that grief works in your life. It's not something that goes away. And it also is like, it is not something that you can ignore. And one day, if you haven't already, you will be forced to face it. And I have been. And this is something that a lot of people will either support you in, or they won't. And if they do support you in, there's no way that they can possibly be saying that you're too much of anything, because that is what grief is. Grief is literally, it begs for more space. And the people that are the ones that are saying you're too much of this, you're too much of that, are the ones who are not doing that for themselves, who are not allowing themselves to be full. The more that I'm realizing this about myself within the last couple of months specifically, when that comes to what I want to do with my life and my career, which I'm very secure in, I know what I want, I know I'm here now. It's like, how do I get to this place, right? Like, how do I progress? And I'm starting to realize that it's less about progressing and more about just being, and not projecting, and instead embodying. And this is something that I'm not good at, but a lot of that actually requires slowing down instead of speeding up, and learning to embrace my intuition and my deep feeling and my logic and my intellect, and trusting my gut, because it's something that I was always told was wrong. And that's the thing that's going to throw you off, is trusting your gut, right? Because the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, is what I was always told. And now I know that that's not the case. Without a doubt, I know that that's not the case. And until I learned to trust myself and to perceive myself as worthy no matter what, it was like a lost cause trying to get anyone else to see that about myself. And now I'm realizing that when I do that for myself, I don't need anyone else to do that for me. And that's just, it's a whole new world. And leading into where I want to go in career and in business and with my marriage and with my relationship with my kid and my relationships with my siblings and even friends, because I have a couple friends, but I hardly ever see them, and I'm really bad at reaching out to new people to make new friends, and it's because of that fear of being perceived wrong. And I'm realizing now, like, I need to just let go of that, because it's kind of like a thing that people say a lot, like, oh, the people that are meant to find you will find you. And it just felt like that was not happening. Like, well, where are they? And if that's the case and there's no one here, then am I just going to be alone? But I really think that it's less about just sitting around and waiting for those people to find you, and more about you being yourself so brightly that you are leading them to you. And that's what I was doing wrong. And that's what I was not accepting about myself. And so I recently reached out to some new people for the first time. And I was like, you know what? I don't really care if they think I'm crazy. I'm not going to send this message. I don't really care if most people by society's perspective would think that this is too much for a first message or, first conversation. I'm just going to say it because this is me. And if it scares them away, then I know that this isn't going to work, because if they're scared by the first message, then they're definitely not going to stick around for the long run, which is less scary to me now that I am secure enough in myself that I've always loved being alone, but now I see the difference between being alone and being lonely, and I'm not lonely anymore. And I'm not lonely when it comes to being in my own brain, and it doesn't scare me. Being told that you're too much your whole life can really make you believe that you are, and make you scared of your own brain and of your own mind and of your own heart and of your own soul and the depths that it goes to. And that's what was happening with me. I was afraid of myself, and I was afraid, especially after my daughter died and after my miscarriages, because grief, like I said, it demands to be heard and it demands to be felt. It demands that you make room for it. And that is a really scary thing when you're afraid of yourself and you're afraid of your depths, because it feels like you're gonna die. Like, it feels like you are gonna drown. It feels like you're not gonna make it out of this alive, and it's gonna be all your fault. And that honestly has been a huge reason why I was really suicidal for a lot of my life too, and struggled with eating disorders, and I struggled with self-harming and suicidal ideations and suicide attempts. And it was because I was so afraid of being in my own body and in my own mind, and I was so afraid of the depths of my soul that it was not safe. And now I am not like that anymore. And this is something that I started realizing a while back about my mental illness, my mental health struggles, that it's not something to be cured. Those voices that I heard for so long were trying to tell me what they were trying to tell me for a reason. And if I just stopped to listen, not obey, just listen and consider, why am I feeling like this? Then, getting to the root of all these things. A lot of people will call this shadow work, which I didn't know what shadow work was by definition until I looked back at what I've been doing for the past 7 years-ish and was like, okay, that's what it is. And I stand by that being what makes you feel safe in your own mind and in your own body. And that is where security comes from. I've always kind of viewed myself as a really insecure person, but it's because you can't be secure in something that you're scared of. And I was scared of myself, so how could I be secure there? I was scared of myself, so how could I trust myself? And if other people were scared of me, scared of my depths, that meant that they were bad. But now I know that that's not true. And a lot of people are scared of other people's depths because they're scared of their own. And that has also given me a really clarifying perspective of my family growing up and why a lot of my family members were the way that they are, and why my dad left me, and why a lot of my family members did the things that they did that caused me a lot of harm. And it was because when you're leading your life from fear, it's because you're scared of yourself. And they really were. And now I can have a lot of compassion towards that looking back. And now I can finally do that for myself. And that's something that I never thought that I would be able to do. And I'm literally just, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. Like, this is going to continue growing and expanding for the rest of my life. And I crave that, like I really do. Now that I'm no longer scared of myself, I actually want to live. And that's like, as someone who tried to commit suicide many times, that's like, it feels like that was never going to happen. Like, no matter how hard I tried, I didn't feel like living. I just felt like dying, and I don't feel like that anymore. And that is like relief that I never thought that I would have. And it's not because my life got better, because I still have so many things in my life that could, if I was in that mindset, they could give me reason to want to die. Now, the reason that I want to live is not because my life is perfect. The reason I want to live is because I trust myself. I accept my depths. I am okay being too much. I'm okay with being too much for someone else as long as I am enough for myself. I want to live and I want to grow. And if I think that I'm deep now, if they think I'm too much now, too deep, not everything has to be deep. Yes, it does. I think it's going to get a lot deeper. I think it's going to get a lot more real. I think it's going to continue growing, and I crave that. I want that in my life. And now currently we have the full moon in Aries coming up next week, and I was watching a video of a girl talking about this full moon in Aries, about how Aries, she said that Aries it's the first sign in the zodiac, and it's considered to be like a newborn, right? And a newborn has no idea no care in the world about how they're being perceived, just that their needs are being met and that they are getting what they need and that they're growing. And that completely shifted my perspective about when it comes to being perceived. And in this tarot spread that I had done last week for the new moon with my husband, one of the cards that I kept getting over and over and over was there was two cards, the Fool and the Magician. And the Fool in tarot is a blank slate, like a newborn starting out on his journey. And the Magician is the number one card. It's like, just one step up from the Fool, and knowing that the Magician has everything that he needs to make his life what it's meant to be and what he wants it to be. And I kept getting those over and over again. And then this girl in this video said that about Aries, and I keep seeing things about this Aries full moon coming up and being like, finally, this is the point where you're going to finally let go of what other people care about you, or like how other people perceive you. And you're going to let go of caring about what other people think about your life. And you're going to start prioritizing what you care about and what you want in your life and things like that. And this is something that I've been trying to get to for a very, very long time. And instead of trying to achieve that, I'm just learning to let it be what it is. And that's how it is achieved. And thinking about it from this newborn perspective, kind of, in some ways it was like, whoa, I didn't get that as a child. I was not allowed to be that innocent child. I was not allowed to just expect my needs to be met. you know, having your needs met was considered like leverage over you, you know, and that was just something that I was never, I still struggle asking for help because of that. And learning how to let it be okay to need help, and let it be okay that my needs, my basic needs, need to be met. And that being my journey is like, it's something that's on my mind a lot right now. And I see my life headed that direction. It's been headed that direction for a while now. I know some Aries people in my life, and I've always really been inspired by their fearlessness, I guess, and their courage, and they seem very like warriors to me. And I want to be that way. And I believe I am in the inside. I just am not very good at letting that come out. So right now where my journey is taking the mask off and letting myself unmask and letting myself be who I've always been. And the struggle for me is not caring about what other people think about it. And I think that instead of not caring about what other people think, I just need to find new people who actually care. Because a lot of these people, they have opinions, they have thoughts, and they have feelings, but it's not about what is best for me, even though they might think that. And it's led from their own fear, because they don't have that security in themselves and they don't trust themselves, you know, like I was saying earlier. And so I need to find the people that are already secure in themselves, and I need to find the people who are on that journey to be secure in themselves, who are learning to accept their depths and who are learning to accept the depths of other people, because I am not going to settle for a life of being in a little box, and I'm not going to settle for trying to make myself less than I am, because the whole point of being alive to me, you know, having this human experience, is to be the full extent of who we are and to feel the depths to our souls. Because otherwise, why are we here, right? Like, what is this experience for? And if it's all about what's after this, then have you truly lived? And if I can just be instead of doing, I need to just be. And I've said this for years, but it doesn't feel like I really understood what that meant and what that looked like for me personally, because I was like, well, I know I need to be, but like, what am I supposed to be? And it's not about that. It's just being in the moment, being in myself, and just secure in myself, and not being afraid of my depths, because I know I'm a very deep person, and intellectually I am very complex, and emotionally I am very complex, and I accept both of those things about myself, and I view those things as being good and needed things in this world. And if, at the very least, if I am going to think about how I'm being perceived by other people, I need to shift my perspective to when I am myself, when I am secure in myself, when I trust myself, when I am accepting and embracing the deepest parts of my soul, of my mind, of my spirit, and of my body in a different way. When I am accepting of myself to that extent, and I am allowing myself to just be who I am without caring about who thinks I'm too much of these things, and inevitably I'm giving space to these people who are feeling the same way, who are going through the same things, who have been told that they're too much or that they're too little of something, who have been told to change their entire lives, who have been told that they can't trust themselves, who have been suicidal because they are scared of their own mind. I am giving these people permission to just be. I'm giving them permission. When I take my mask off, I'm giving them permission to take theirs off too. I was at an event the other day, and I was standing there so uncomfortably, and I was like thinking, I really want to sit down, but no one else is sitting down, and I don't want to stand out. And it was making me really uncomfortable, both physically, because I really needed to sit down, but also just emotionally, like, oh, what is it going to look like if I sit down? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down because I'm not even enjoying this show that I'm trying to watch, right? Because I'm so absorbed in this that I can't even enjoy what we're here for. So I just sat down, and literally the second that I sat down, everybody else sat down. And I was like, we're all doing the same thing. We're all so absorbed with like what other people are thinking of us, whether it's from a perspective of trying to gain self-awareness or of just trying to be loved, or for any other reason. We're really too concerned with what other people are thinking of us that we just need to be in the moment. And when I am able to do that for myself, I'm giving permission to a lot of other people that they can do that for themselves. And even if I'm a lot different than that person, like if I'm totally different than that person, if we're both giving each other permission to just be, then I believe that that's what being like-minded and having like-minded and supportive people in your life truly means. Not that we're all supposed to look the same or be the same or act the same or feel the same or think the same or whatever. It's really that we're all supposed to give each other the space to just be ourselves. So this is something that I'm growing into, and that I feel like it's going to take me my entire life, and it's going to uncover many different layers of myself, and I'm going to continue to expand and to grow. And I love that about myself. And it's got me genuinely excited to live my life in a way that I've never experienced before. I've never experienced this will to live, let alone desire to live, let alone just a craving to live it more and to live it more fully and to live it more deeply. And this is something that I am really just learning to embrace. And I know that there are a lot of other people who are in who are in similar situations, that I just really hope that the way that I find my people is that I'm going to draw in the same, to draw in the people who are trying to do the same in their lives, and that we can do this together. Anyways, that was a long rant, but that's where my mind has been. And even if I don't end up posting this, I hope that I can look back on where I am right now and appreciate how far I've come and be proud of myself, because I should be.